Good afternoon. This is Module 7, People First Language. What an exciting topic. I really loved learning about this one, and it's so important, especially when we look at the data and we realize that 1 in 5 Americans have a disability. So we're looking at 20% on average, if we were kind of looking in the school system, of the students that represent this subgroup, students with a disability. And what I found really great from this research from Cutler was that I never really thought about this before, but it doesn't um, while it's a subgroup within itself, it's also very representative of all subgroups. So you have all ages, genders, religions, ethnicities, sexual orientation, socioeconomic level, anything, everything, all represented within this other subgroup of students with disabilities. So, I never really looked at it through that lens before, and I love data. And so that's really a fun, new perspective that this has given me. And then to really dig into this further, really kind of naming the problem. What is the problem that we're talking about with our language? Why is this even an issue? And again, from the same research, Cutler had this amazing quote that said, "When we see the diagnosis as the most important characteristic of a person, we devalue him or her as an individual." And that one really rung true to me. I had this experience as a teacher several years ago when someone corrected my language, and it took kind of a learning experience to kind of figure out why language is so important, why it matters. I thought we were saying the same thing, but we weren't. And so it's a good experience, and I've really shifted my values and had to explore some of my assumptions on this. And so you can see in this Wordle here that when we don't put the person first and the diagnosis comes first, or the disability comes first, these are the thoughts that come to mind and the assumptions that naturally are connected to those. And these are not words that we want representing our students. Even more importantly, as a parent, these wouldn't be the words that I would want to represent my child, or the first thoughts that come to people's mind. And so that's the why. That's why this person first language matters. Is it important? And author George Orwell pushed my thinking with this quote. He says, "If thought corrupts language, language can also corrupt thought." And that's definitely true. He is a man of words, for sure. That was his occupation there. And I think that's exactly what we're talking about here, that our language matters because it can corrupt or enhance the way we think about something. And so we need to be paying more attention to it. Again, another article from Snow had this research here, and it just talked about, for too long, we've called disabilities have been subject to marginalization, devaluation, prejudice, and so much more. And I love the ending of this quote that says, "Our language shapes our attitudes shape our language, and they're intertwined." So it's circular, it's cyclical, I guess I should say, and they both impact one another. And our attitude and language both drive our actions. And so we want a congruency there in what we believe and what we say and what we do. So for our learning and to push it further, here are some common terms that are no longer appropriate. And you might find some of them kind of surprising. I know I did. Disabled is no longer accepted use. Leads to a person to think about these terms: broken, damaged, defective. So we don't want to say a person is disabled. You can say a person with a disability, but they themselves, we don't want to associate with being fixed and disabled. Again, it leads to those assumptions. This is one that I found very interesting. I didn't realize this, so this was new learning for me. Handicap is a term that's no longer used in federal legislation. It evokes negative imagery of pity, fear, or worse. And so I thought that was fantastic learning for me, that, again, always learning, always growing. And as I read further in the research, they said now handicap used to, when it's referred to like a location, such as a spot, parking spot, or a hotel room. Now the word and the term is accessible. So talking about what it is not. And so it makes things more accessible. So an accessible hotel room, an accessible parking spot, and using that word for what the need is to make things more accessible. And the term special needs, again, it generates pity. So again, those are words that you might be more familiar with and that are no longer acceptable terms to use. So what are some considerations? What are your checklists? What are some lenses that we need to use if we strive to have person first language? Really, it's about ensuring that the language is about the person and not the disability. That's key. You know, as a counselor for several years, I was always taught that too, that we need to really make sure the person comes first and not link these labels, because that tends to shift our own mindsets and our own identity on ourselves. And so really focusing on the person, not the behavior, is what we always talked about in counseling. And this is very similar. It's about the person, not the disability. Focus on the need and not the problem. That one's huge. So again, it's really shifting from highlighting this problem to really what are their needs, and how are we using that to describe it? So again, going back to, it's about accessibility, not necessarily the handicap itself. Avoid negative imagery such as suffers from, afflicted with, victim of, high, low functioning. And so those words can really put negative imagery into our mind. And again, knowing that it's cyclical, that our language affects our thoughts and our thoughts affect our language, we want to make sure we really clean that up and provide clarity to what we're actually thinking, and that matches our language. So as I was reflecting over words that I hear, and I hear often and kind of a misuse of, because I've become aware of them because I was guilty of using them in the same way, I would say. And so luckily I have amazing colleagues who supported me in my journey and my growth and are continuing to do so. Some ones that were big are, I hear often, are tier 3 students or our tier 2 students, right? We put that label first. It's about where they're falling at that particular moment. And so instead, we might try to say students who are receiving tier 3 supports. That one's a really easy one to tweak, but we often put that label first and then the students at the end, and we want to flip that around, especially with this one, because this isn't a fixed. They might just say, hey, they might need a little extra support for the moment, but it doesn't mean that they're a tier 3 student. I mean, that's like a Hotel California, right? Check in, never check out. So we don't want that at all. This is another one that's very common, especially when we're talking about subgroups. We say, oh, the SPED kids, or, oh, they're just behavior kids, right? And so again, it's about putting this label on them, putting them into a box, and forgetting that there are students first. And so again, kind of flipping that around is the best way to start, at least students who are eligible for SPED services or students who receive behavior supports. So something like that, if you're categorizing and looking at data through a lens like that, make sure it's about the students first. It's not just a number. It's not just a category. These are children behind these numbers, and we want to make sure we have the right language. And disabled. So again, this was a new one that was kind of brought out again in this research. And so again, we can say, she has a, and then be specific, disability. So name it, right? Name it. And so we don't want to use slang, or we don't want to use generics, like name the disability. And so we can figure out what the needs are, and that's how you can describe it. But again, it's a person first. And this is another one that I hear a lot, especially with students that have gifted talents and exceptionalities. We hear, oh, the smart kids. Okay, and so that's another label. Even though it seems positive, it can imply that the others are not smart. And so again, students with exceptionalities might be an option that we could use and to change this language. And there are many more examples and that were found in the research. Those were just kind of the 4 that rose to the top. But as you continue on, you can look through here. This is a great resource to say, okay, if this is what you're hearing a lot, try this instead of the other. And it can really, again, just take some practice, and it can shift our language. So it's a small tweak for us to really become an advocate. Here are the references that I used for this assignment, and I really appreciate all of them, and thank you for your time. I hope that we're all excited to be on this journey to get people first language and start to disturb the system to really push and explore assumptions.